Thank you so much for that very kind introduction. And thank you so much to the Linnean Society for hosting me and inviting me today to share with all of you. And thank you to everyone that has made the time in a busy day in London to come and hear my talk. I now want to start with a story. Once upon a time, there was a group of semi-nomad people living in the deep Peruvian Amazon, in a space filled with expansive lakes and rivers, like you see in this photo, with ancient, old, sacred trees, with sounds from all the biodiversity around, from frogs, crickets, birds in the morning, to the different scents that one gets in the Amazon, from citrusy to sweet to bitter, that change throughout the day. And this group of people lived in direct relationship with nature. The Amazon wasn't just their home, it was their pharmacy, their hardware store, their grocery shop. And they knew that they needed to regenerate as they go, because according to their worldviews, they need to ensure that not only are they taking, but that they are leaving enough for those that come next. And this place is home to biodiversity that most have never even heard of, such as the beautiful pink dolphins that we find in the Amazon rainforests, that almost feel magical in the relationship they develop as a species, as families, together with the local people too, to the larger predators, like the incredible jaguars that hold so much mystery and are regarded as very powerful spirits as well, to, of course, an incredible variety of birds of trillion colors that really just makes you wonder what else is out there, to the rich and deep culture that fill these lands to this day, and that have so much wisdom regarding our planet, regarding our flora and our fauna, and that to this day share about their worldviews, their perspectives, as well as their knowledge, their pain, and their dreams through singing, through poetry, through music that may sound like this. And one of the people in this community of semi-nomad people was my great-great-grandmother, that was known to be a powerful shaman. People say she used to revive the dead with roots, leaves, and flowers. She eventually left the deep Amazon due to persecution and migrated to the high Andean mountains. Completely different ecosystem, different biodiversity, where she adapted not only her life and herself, but her knowledge on traditional medicine as well. And she shared that knowledge with the rest of the community in which she settled, and eventually with the next generations that followed, including my grandmother, who is still alive and who was born and raised in the high Andean mountains of Peru, in a small town that, in her words, had less than 200 roofs when you counted them from the highest peak of the mountains. There was no access to Western medicine, and so from early on, she learned from her elderly and her own ancestors about what natural resources to use to treat different conditions, knowing what specific tree bark you want to use when you have certain infections, to what combination of flowers and leaves you want to use to treat other illnesses. My family eventually migrated to the capital city of Peru so that the next generations could have access to education. And something she made sure to not leave behind, though, was her traditional knowledge. And so when they moved to the city, which is where I was born and raised, She brought all of that knowledge with her and developed and built this small natural pharmacy that still is alive in our garden, filled with Andean plants as well as Amazonian ones, including a key Amazonian tree species that was planted when I was born and still alive today. My grandmother never had the chance to attend school. It was not allowed in her times. So she never learned how to read or write until her 70s. And she dreamed of becoming a doctor. She always held so much knowledge. She had such a methodical way of preparing the different natural resources that I saw her harvesting from our own garden. She knew how long to rinse things for, or how long to leave certain leaves soaking for, to create the exact perfect combination to give a specific result. In my eyes, she was the first chemist I met. Perhaps she didn't have the more westernized scientific methodology and terms to explain what was going on. And instead, she explained things to me through cultural stories, through myths. I grew up seeing my grandmother talk to flowers, kissing roses, and asking for permission before she took. Because to her, as well as to the indigenous communities we have around Peru, around the Amazon and the Andes, nature is alive. Nature is present, and every natural entity, from rocks to rivers to mountains to flowers to animals, have a spirit, and as such you approach it with that. I was born and raised in the city, but we have family all across the mountains and the Amazon. So my summers looked slightly different to most of the kids I attended school with. My summers, since I was a 1-year-old, were spent learning how to harvest potatoes in the high Andean mountains with my cousins, or visiting the rest of my family in the different parts of the Amazon, navigating the rivers in these traditional wooden boats that we know as peke peke because of the sound that the motor makes whenever it's going pek, 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 pek. And to me, that was my version of Disneyland. That was how we had fun. And I grew up playing outdoors, getting fruits straight from our garden, which was the Amazon, getting to interact in the way that local people do with the wildlife, and hearing the stories of our ancestors. I also was already attending school and learning English early on. So it's no surprise that I had so many questions growing up. I wanted to know more about what my grandma was doing and why did it work? What was the chemistry behind? What were the genetics? And so really, I made it my mission to become the first scientist in my family. They didn't even know what that meant. It was a bit scary. I had to learn and improve my English, especially around when I was 15, that I became even more obsessed with the natural world through educations at school. And I remember at the time, the internet was starting to just really get settled. And I would look for information about the Amazon rainforest, about our own biodiversity questions that we were raising. And I couldn't really find much information, much less in Spanish, and next to nothing led by our own people. And so that led me to an entire journey that has allowed me then to be here with you many years after. I decided to pursue a career in science, and I studied really hard to get scholarships, which eventually led me to the United States, where I completed a dual degree in biochemistry and molecular biology, followed by a long PhD in chemical biology, as well as a postdoctoral researcher position at the University of Michigan. It was throughout these multiple experiences of going as far as I could in modern science, in laboratory experiences, that I learned within this modern science analytical mindset, there wasn't much space or frameworks that would allow for indigenous wisdom to be elevated in the way that I saw growing up. And so throughout my PhD, I had this vision. Why couldn't we lead indigenous-led science from the deep Amazon? What can we do different so that science can be a tool for justice as well, so that science can be the basis of policy in places that are even unstable politically, like my own country. And so that has led me to start and grow an organization called Amazon Research Internacional, based in Peru, where our mission is to use modern science to elevate indigenous wisdom, to study, protect, and regenerate fragile species and ecosystems and the culture associated. And to do that, training the next generation of indigenous youth and scientists so that people like my grandmother can have their knowledge not just celebrated, but also integrated into scientific literature that can then form the basis for policy that leads to tangible change. Throughout my PhD, I also became a National Geographic explorer. They supported part of my PhD work to start conducting independent research in the Peruvian Amazon. And as part of that network and relationship, I started to dive deep into science communication as well. So now my career has really allowed me to work on a variety of really incredible projects, from working with NASA to create bilingual content around Space Week and research, to working with National Geographic and Disney and their partners in a variety of topics, expanding what scientists look like on TV, but also in exploration. And I think really inspiring as well the next generation of Latinos that we have. And some of those projects have taken me to really deep waters, including Lake Michigan, that are, let me just put here, that are extremely cold. And this is a production we did where we actually, for my postdoctorate, needed to get samples that were really far in Lake Michigan, but also being able to show how you can do this while amplifying exploration. And just a fun behind the scenes, this video, I think, reached over 1 million views with Nat Geo, was that I had just recovered from COVID, and we had to be diving into the water. So it was a whole challenge on its own too. So I went from really cold waters to extremely hot ones as well. Part of the first independent scientific work that I led in the Peruvian Amazon was in a place that most have never even heard of. So I will ask you the question, have you guys ever heard of the boiling river of the Peruvian Amazon? Can you raise your hand if you have? Oh, yay. For those who haven't, I highly suggest you go look it up. There is an incredible TED Talk, an amazing book as well of my colleague that made this place known to the world. And this is the largest documented thermal river that we have on our planet. Typically, when we have hot springs, we tend to have them connected to volcanoes because that makes sense as to what feeds that energy and heat that makes it boil, like Yellowstone National Park, hot springs across Iceland, Ethiopia, Italy, and they tend to be isolated. Flora doesn't like to be growing nearby. It's too hot, right? It's too uncomfortable. The same for a human being. However, what is quite unique about the boiling river in the Peruvian Amazon is that the nature around doesn't mind. You find giant trees and flowers and bushes that don't care that that vapor that you see rising from the water is so hot that it will make you dizzy, and you cannot see well in the photo, but I am absolutely drenched in my own sweat. It is so extreme that you have to be extremely mindful of every step. Each of those rocks are filled with algae, which makes it really slippery. One wrong step, and you're gonna get third-degree burns immediately, which is something unfortunate that did happen to one of our colleagues. He recovered though. And the reason why I became fascinated with this space is multiple. One, it holds a special place in the culture of the local Shipibo and Ashaninka people. It's believed that this river it's home to powerful spirits that are medicinal and that protects this region. And for a long time, because it's so extreme, and when animals would accidentally fall in, would immediately cook, people thought nothing could survive. In fact, before, the locals used to cook their chickens in the river. They still boil their eggs and make their tea. Until you ask questions through a different lens. So the first time I went, I remember seeing so many colors in the hottest parts of the river, from pinks to oranges to different shades of green, yellows. And that really immediately triggered the question, that is life, just a different kind, microbial life. And so that led to part of what became one of the chapters in my PhD thesis, which was to map the extreme microbes, the extremophiles that have not just learned to survive in this extreme place where nothing else can, but thrive in it. And really giving us a snapshot almost of a natural laboratory to understand climate change, to understand the potential role that these extreme microbes could be playing to help the flora adapt in extreme temperatures, and see what lessons we can gather from that. With our work, we were able to discover species of extreme microbes that were new to science and name them after cultural spirits, so that data can serve the local community to gain recognition to protect their lands that unfortunately happens to be in an area of high risk of deforestation. Throughout our organization and our projects, we've been able to expand in a variety of wildlife with a new project that we actually just launched in my last trip. I just came back from the Amazon 2 weeks ago. Feels already a lot farther than that. Where throughout the different projects we've been working, we keep hearing different clues. And I think that is the beauty of exploration out there in the wild, just staying open to what also emerges. Because I believe, and my indigenous colleagues believe too, that the Amazon shows you what you need to see at the right time, not before, not after. And so we're always very aware about the different clues and pieces of evidence or stories that we hear, and see how that weaves into a new potential story or interest for the local communities. And so we kept hearing stories about animals self-medicating. Have you guys ever heard of the concept zoopharmacognosy? It's an area of science that is dedicated at studying how animals self-medicate. So, for example, if you have a domesticated animal, like a dog or a cat, have you ever seen them eating grass? My little puppy does that. It's a way of purging. So it only makes sense that the rest of our animals, our wildlife, will have a capacity to sense where medicine is. And how I came to these questions was rather unique. And I do talk a little bit about in my book. I was doing an ayahuasca session with one of our masters as a way to get closer to my culture. And it is a way of training as well for our local teams, with our indigenous teams. And this is gonna sound very bizarre, but stay with me. In one of these lucid dreams, I became a black jaguar. And as a black jaguar, I had two cubs that were injured and that they needed help. And I was searching for a new place for them, a new home where they could be safe and they could recuperate. And in that process, I was able to find what appeared to be a space where water was nearby, that felt safe. But also I remember seeing small yellow flowers that through my senses, I knew they would be the right medicine for my cubs. And coming out of that, I had never even considered the idea or the concept that animals can self-medicate. And that really led me to ask the question, how did medicinal knowledge came to be in our planet? We tend to hear, oh, the elderly learn from their elderly, from the grandparents. But when did that start? It's almost like the chicken and the egg. Could it be that part of this knowledge emerged from observing wildlife approach different natural resources when they're sick? The examples that we currently have on our scientific literature are primarily from Africa and from Asia, where there are incredible examples. For example, scientists had learned that elephants were consuming a specific type of tree bark to induce labor. And then they learned that the women in that community were making tea from that same tree bark to induce labor as well. A beautiful indication that there could be some knowledge exchange, if you may. And there have been other incredible examples with chimps and even other wildlife forms. But that really guided us to ask those questions throughout the Amazon, where we have been collecting clues. I cannot say much yet, but we are hoping to put our first report out. And we are hoping that this information can not only generate new knowledge or even contribute to theories as to how medicinal knowledge came to be on our planet, but that it can also guide reforestation, not only with native species, but with floral species that are medicinally important to our wildlife, which we often don't hear about. But yet here, wildlife is suffering, is endangered, and we are not doing enough. Part of that work requires to even know where the wildlife is. And so we have been working for this project in the central Peruvian Amazon, in the largest biosphere of Peru that was recognized by UNESCO just 2 years ago, called the Avideri Brine Biosphere. And because of multiple threats that they faced and a very violent past that they suffer, this area has almost escaped the media and tourism trends in Peru. And so, although it's the largest biosphere that we have in our country, it is also the least explored. And they didn't have any camera traps permanently installed. So we started to do that work with our indigenous partners. And here's just a short clip of the beautiful wildlife that we find. In this trip that we just came back from, we found fresh jaguar footprints 5 minutes away from our camp. Could never see them with our own 2 eyes, but yes, through the camera traps. We've been able to define where tapirs are moving to and from, and even found a clip that I cannot share just yet, but shows a giant armadillo, which have become so extremely rare to find. And I'll just give you a piece of thing that I probably couldn't share yet, but that giant armadillo had unearthed a relic that we believe could belong to a previous civilization in the area. So absolutely incredible surprises that the jungle gives us. Throughout our explorations, we stay attuned to what our indigenous youth is interested in as well. We take in, because the point is for them to be leading science as well, and to have that autonomy and that leadership, to hopefully be them telling you stories next time here. And part of that has led us to learn about biofluorescent life in the Amazon. So I'm sure you are familiarized with bioluminescent life in our planet, typically from the deep ocean. You've seen clips of glowing jellyfish, even glowing turtles. The concept of glowing from nature has been mostly explored in the deep ocean because it's associated with the fact that the farther you go into the deep ocean, the farther away you are from light. So you're in deep darkness, which then generates this pressure to glow, to mate, to attract prey, to deter your predators, and so forth. So for a long time, those studies or even those ideas were restricted to this space. Of course, research is evolving. We're seeing that there is a whole language of light that we are only just getting started to decode, where other life forms in other ecosystems have the ability to glow, perhaps not through bioluminescence, that they just glow chemically, but through biofluorescence, where you need to shine at them with a UV light or a black light for them to kind of respond back with this other light, similar to what happens with scorpions. Most scorpion species glow. It's a cool thing you can do with your friends or with your kids. But nobody had asked, or nobody's asking even the question. We also have areas in the deep Amazon that are so covered by canopy that it does generate a constant level of darkness. There are areas where you won't even see the sun for hours and hours of trekking. So could that also generate that kind of pressure for wildlife to evolve some sort of mechanism to communicate to one another? And why is this important? First, I think it's an incredible way to look at wildlife and to generate wonder and curiosity. But also, there's been so many important biomedical and biotechnological applications that have derived from glowing natural resources out there in our planet that help with imaging, to detect disease, to be able to track illnesses, and so forth. And as part of a very preliminary expedition, we went to another region of the Amazon that has some of the richest biodiversity I've ever seen, not expecting to find anything, until there was this tiny glass frog. And I will say that photo does not make it justice. We were not ready to take these photos. We did not touch the wildlife. We did not capture it. But this small, transparent frog, in a way, glass frog, it had deep, dark eyes, just entirely black eyes. And the moment we shone the UV light, they glowed so bright that felt like two bulbs had just turned on in the dark. We couldn't believe it. And then we thought we had lucked out. And then we found a cricket whose head was glowing, only the head as well, generating so many questions as to why is that happening and what else could we find. So now we have a Kukama biology student that is going to be taking this as her thesis project, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to share more. From literature, we know that there is virtually no scientific reports on biofluorescent life from the Amazon yet. I know another incredible group working on it, and they have seen even snakes that have this capacity to glow, as well as a variety of other incredible wildlife. But we believe this is only the second species of frog that has been detected to only glow from the eyes. And last but not least, I want to tell you about another one of our really special projects, and perhaps the one that has become the most visible for us. But before I go any farther, so before you think I'm just seeking adrenaline in my life, have you guys ever heard of the stingless bee? Can you raise your hand if you have heard of the stingless bee? I presume that in this room we would get more hands raised up than the usual. I get to speak across the globe with National Geographic and other groups to classrooms, educators, leaders. And I kid you not, in most places I go to, even rooms filled with 500 or 1,000 people, I typically only get 1 or 2 people raising their hands, meaning most of our planet has never heard about the tiny, mighty stingless bee. So I'll tell you about it. And those are the ones I'm posing with in here. This was a shot that we did for National Geographic. It took 4 hours to get this photo. And you cannot see there very well because the light was great and the photographer was amazing, but I was sweating. I had to be positioned in such a weird way to be at the right angle. And yet I had to keep my cool because the bees sense the fear and then comfort, and you want to stay calm, so they also stay calm around you because they have other ways to defend themselves, even if they cannot sting. And I'll get to that in a minute, which will make you rethink this photo as well. So the stingless bee, what most people also don't know is that it's the oldest bee on our planet. There is a scientific study that was actually shared in the New York Times as well in the 80s, where scientists had found a fossilized tree resin from the area that is now known as New York. And in that tiny tree resin, a stingless bee had been frozen in time. And that is the only evidence we have that literally even changed the evolution timeline that we thought of for plants in our planet. It basically made us rethink, why would bees exist if there's no flora? So it moved the timeline by 2 million years on when flora developed in our planet, which is insane. So they lived in the time of the dinosaurs. And the most closely resembled individual to this ancient bee are the stingless bees of the Amazon, which is quite special. They are found throughout our tropics now. So if you follow the equator line around our globe, you will find stingless bees from Mexico to Costa Rica to the forests of Australia, Africa, Asia, and of course, the Amazon rainforests. They hold a special relationship with indigenous cultures around the planet. Some have been documented, like the Mayan culture with stingless bees, where some leaders would even bury their elderly and their most important figures with stingless bee honey as a way to honor their dead, to other cultures like the Aboriginals Australians as well. What I also think is quite fascinating is that there are a few strong theories out there that try to understand how did the human brain develop? How did we become the species that we are now? How did our brain become so powerful? And one of the theories that fascinates me the most is that attributes honey a big part as to how our brain got the nutrients it needed to be able to develop the complexity that we now have, which I think poses a lot of interesting questions. Throughout our planet, currently, we have between 500 and 600 documented unique species of stingless bees. Some look very different to one another. So if I show you this photo, and I didn't tell you about stingless bees before, and I tell you that these are as tiny as a grain of rice, what do you think these are? I thought they were ants the first time I saw them, being 100% honest. They are stingless bee. The smallest stingless bee currently documented is 2 millimeters, and some can be as large as the largest bumblebees I have seen here in the UK. The colors also vary widely. I have seen some that their bodies are this green metallic color, and some where their wings seem to have this shimmering purple and pink, just making you wonder why isn't there like a Disney movie alone with these stingless bees. They're fascinating. From the 500 to 600 species we have worldwide, about 180 to 250 have been seen and documented in the north of the Peruvian Amazon alone. We believe that we are doubling on that number if we are to explore the rest of the Amazon. In our last trip, where I just came from, we believe we may have even found already a few new species. What I also haven't said yet is how they defend themselves. If they don't stink, what do? They have multiple mechanisms. They can fly really hard, some of them. So through that mechanical action, they almost kind of hit you if they're angry. They also collect resins from medicinal trees nearby that are known to have antimicrobial properties, which help deter ants and other species that come to invade their nests. But they can also bite. When I was first told that these species can bite, I actually saw a larger species that when they bite you, they do it so hard that they will rip skin off and will make you bleed. And I saw that live, and I said, I am not posing with that. That is terrifying. So we found one that is known to be docile. Even as docile, if it gets a little tired or becomes a little aggressive, it will bite. I remember at the end of those four hours for that photo shoot that I explained a bit earlier, 1 or 2 bit me and it felt like a tickle. I was like, you guys are exaggerating. This is rather cute. La la la. Then I came back. It was actually last year. We went with the BBC to document the work, and we were with that same species that has been so docile and calm to me, and it must have just got tired of seeing my face, and it decided to bite me right on the eyelid, which in the moment it hurt, but it went away, and I was like, okay, that's fine. The next day that I was exiting the jungle, my eye puffed up so bad. That photo is already looking better, but what was worse was that it felt like a piece of glass was stuck in my eyeball for about 2 months. they have some sort of unidentified compounds in their saliva that may have caused some microcrystals. That's what the ophthalmologist suggested. So they can defend themselves. And I'll show you a short clip that we recorded with the BBC last year to showcase our work. It's been over 2 hours and I actually think we're a bit lost. And I don't even know how we're gonna find the stingless bees. There are a trillion sounds around us. To look for stingless bees in the middle of the jungle is like to look for a needle in a haystack. We have been working on creating a map of stingless bees around Peru. I'm hoping that by more people being aware of stingless bees, that we can directly regenerate the Amazon rainforest. The bees are disappearing and we have got to get this data so we can advocate for legal protection. 2 in 3 foods that we eat daily depend on bees. If bees disappear, the world has less than a year to survive. The Amazon rainforest is not for the faint-hearted. It can definitely get very dangerous. This is an area rich in some of the most dangerous snakes in the world. It can get extremely hot and extremely humid, so you have to watch out for extreme dehydration. You have to navigate virgin paths, which means you really don't know where you're going. You're building a path as you go. Very unstable and slippery.
Creo que este es el sonido de las abejas.
So it seems like Heriberto has heard the bees. I genuinely cannot hear them just yet, but I trust him.
Wow. No, no las veo, pero las escucho fuerte.
Sí.
Esta especie es una de las que hace las mieles más medicinales.
Sí.
We have to be very careful, very accurate, annotate every detail very precisely, because we have got to have precise information of the location, the environmental conditions in which these bees exist, so that we can monitor how climate change, deforestation are impacting them. This is how we get to save the stingless bee in the Amazon.
Ha sido aprobada
It's been
en primera
approved
votación
in
el
first
texto sustitutorio
round
de
of
la Comisión
voting.
Agraria que modifica
Everyone voted in favor.
esta alegría.
Everyone? Yeah, I can't. I'm just in shock. I could cry. I cried very, very long and hard. Our science work for over the last 2-3 years was used as the basis to create a new law, which we also did push hard from all of our indigenous partners and research organizations, creating a historic law in Peru, the first one that legally recognizes stingless bees as our native species and calls for their protection as well as their promotion. And we're already seeing incredible implementations. It was only approved unanimously in December. It got implemented in January. And what are we, at the end of July? We already have at least 3 or 4 examples on how it's leading to national changes, which gets us really excited and really hopeful. We're only a small team. We have limited funding and we're independent. And so I think it shows that when we gather our efforts across interdisciplinary teams and we do things relentlessly, we can get real change. Just to finish up, how I came to stingless bees, because I'm not an entomologist, I am a chemical biologist. I study the chemistry and the genetics of our natural world, was through its medicinal honey. So when COVID hit and the world shut down, I was in Michigan. I was completing my PhD, and I was connecting with all of the indigenous communities that we have been working with for a long time. And I learned that throughout the different cultures, throughout very different ecosystems and communities, everyone was using 2 key resources to treat the symptoms of COVID. And one of them was the stingless bee honey. Over time, we learned that communities use this honey that they know as the liquid miracle to treat over 20 diseases, from upper respiratory infections to eye cataracts, infertilities, infections, viral conditions, and so forth. And so I said, what is it it's in the honey? Is it just a placebo effect, or are there components there? And what does that look like to have such a range of effects? And I told myself, surely someone has looked into this, right? It was 2020. And as happens in science and in exploration, you just have to be brave enough to ask, what if no one has done it? And that was what led us to become the first group in Peru to lead the first chemical analysis on stingless bee honey, where we validated with modern technology what communities have known for millennia. We found hundreds of unique medicinal compounds throughout this honey that not just validated the ancient wisdom, but it added a value to this important natural resource, which now is generating sustainable economies that allow the communities to grow and develop, but that also directly protect the Amazon. Because every community that is keeping stingless bee sanctuaries are not just boosting the bee population that is on decline, but it is directly protecting and regenerating at least 20,000 square meters of Amazon rainforest around. We are integrating our indigenous partners as co-authors of our work because they have been training with us for the last few years. They're asking questions, they're measuring, they're having this critical thinking, and they are doing the scientific work. And so we're really proud to share that now we have not just the first example of a first author being an Ashaninka member of the community, Richard, but we have a second paper that just got published a few weeks ago, where we are conducting the first mapping of stingless bees and learning how deforestation is impacting them, and working with the ministry to turn that into action that helps the bees and the Amazon. This work is hard. You saw in that short clip, which, by the way, is a 20-minute documentary, not just featuring me, but two other incredible researchers around the world. It's on iPlayer as well as on YouTube. I think it's called Extreme Climate Explorers. But you can see that part of this work we do at night. Why? Because I haven't told you yet that most of these stingless bees nest within hollow trees. So the only clue you have to find them is that tiny little hole into this giant old sacred tree. Virtually impossible when you're talking about hundreds of trees in extreme difficult conditions. So many cultures look for them at night because the bees go back to their hive and they make really buzzing sounds. And that's how we find them. Exploring the Amazon at night is one of my favorite things, is how we growing up learn about our wildlife with our parents. But of course, it also brings out really perhaps dangerous wildlife in the Amazon. I don't know if you have ever heard of the killer caterpillar. It has the record world Guinness for being the most poisonous caterpillar on our planet. Each of those tiny spikes contains enough venom to cause you to bleed from the eyeballs within 2 to 3 hours, leading to brain compression eventually. There is a cure, but you need to act fast. And of course, it's a very painful process. There was an American tourist that accidentally placed her hand in a tree trunk to rest in a night hike, unaware that this mighty killer caterpillar was there. She had to be rushed, of course, to the hospital, but survived and made it. This species is almost as long as this and quite thick. There are some that vary in sizes. And just a wild piece of information that I literally just learned for the first time 2 weeks ago. I was showing this photo to one of our indigenous partners in another region. And the first thing he said when he looked at it, it was, delicious. And I was like, what? And he said, yeah, we eat this. And my eyes just like must have looked like I was in such shock, which I was. And he says, yes, they boil them until the spikes come off, only in the times when they are in high quantities. And then it's a delicacy. So now, of course, that's leading to many other questions and new work for us to explore with our local partners. In the video, you also hear us talking a little bit about snakes. I don't know if you know about the bushmaster. It's not only one of the most toxic snakes that we have in our planet, but known as being the only snake that follows you. To exemplify a very short story, one of my colleagues, an indigenous biologist and tour guide, was doing a night tour and ran into a bushmaster that had just laid eggs. So it was a mama trying to protect her offspring. And so she called her buddy, and what it does is that it jumps forward. So physically moving a few centimeters, which is why people say it follows you. And it beat my friend's boots, rubber boots, which is when I do night walks with any team, mandatory to wear rubber boots. And my friend knew that, so she stayed calm and stayed posed. I don't know how. And the snake did that a total of 3 times. It charged and beat her rubber boots 3 times until eventually it left. And the local myth says that you have to leave a piece of clothing that smells like you so that the snake doesn't follow you. So it's not easy, but we're progressing. And our work has captured attention around the world. We had the New York Times documented in the cover of the science section. And also it has awarded me a position in the list of 100 women in the BBC last year, as well as the 50 more influential women in Peru by Forbes this year. And of course, the law, which was really one of our biggest achievements to date, but not the only one, as we have been working also quietly to release the first World Rights of Nature Declaration for the stingless bee in the Amazon, which will be the first example of a Rights of Nature Declaration for wild bees on our planet. We're hoping to launch that by COP, so more to come on that. And earlier this year, I was notified that I was going to be receiving the Order of Merit by Peruvian government, which is the equivalent of the Presidential Medal for my work in conservation and biodiversity. They told me 2 days before the ceremony, so I couldn't fly that quickly. And I couldn't think of anybody better, more deserving than my own grandmother to stand on stage and receive the award. And so that's her in her graduation, per se. I tell these as well as many, many other stories of other incredible wildlife and incredible people that have asked me to share their stories too in my new book that just got released in May here in the UK, got just released in the US a few days ago, and hopefully will come in Spanish very soon too. And with that, I just want to leave you with one question to you, which is, I reflect back to many moments in my childhood that have led me to where I am today. And I am so aware to try to keep that childlike mindset awake and aware at all times, which is what leads us to new projects and keeps my mind open and curious, as well as grateful, despite of the state of our planet. So I ask you to ask yourselves, what moment in nature moved you as a child, and perhaps share with your loved ones. And with that, I invite you to follow us on social media as well as in our channels. And thank you so much for your attention.